Thank you, Matt. Apologies about the technical difficulties. We'll work that out. It didn't happen at lunchtime, so we're not sure what's going on. But it went well in the end. Thank you. There'll be further commentary about some of what you've said when we get into our discussion afterwards. Now we move on to Sean Godsell. Sean Godsell graduated with first-class honours from the University of Melbourne in 1984 and received a Master of Architecture from RMIT in 1999. He formed Sean Godsell Architects in 1994 and has pursued a rigorous investigation into what he sees as important in architecture ever since. Sean's work has been published in the world's leading architectural journals, and he has 2 monographs. Sean Godsell, Works and Projects, published by Electa in 2003, and Sean Godsell, Tough Subtlety, published by El Croquis in 2013. I understand there's a couple of new books coming up soon. Sean Godsell Architects has received an incredible number of local and international awards for his projects, so I'll only mention the following. That in 2013 he received the RAIA Victoria Medal and William Wardle Awards for the RMIT Design Hub and the Harold Desbroenier Award for the Edward Street House. And in 2018 he received a Papal Silver Medal for the 2018 Architecture Biennale Vatican Chapel in Venice, and also received the Robin Boyd Award for House on the Coast. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sean Godsell.
Thanks, Stephen, and can I also just echo both Stephen and Matt's comments and thank Brickworks for tonight and for their international series and for their support for our profession. It's incredibly generous and very welcome, so thank you very much, Nathan and Lara and everyone else involved. And thank you also to Stephen for his incredible hard work over a number of years with both those series. He seems to me to be tireless and an energetic supporter also of our profession through this medium. So thank you, Stephen, and thank you to Bob for turning up. Okay. I'm going to show 5 projects spanning about 8 years of work. The first one is a funny project to show because it's a battle that we lost initially, and that was to do a new house in this little row house site in Carlton. At the end of this tiny little laneway is Walter Burley Griffin's Newman College at Melbourne University. So this is a student walkway. We fought a noble fight and lost our battle with the City of Melbourne to demolish what was an already destroyed cottage and to build a new house for a couple of empty nesters who were scaling down. They had adult children who'd left home. Undeterred, they said, rightio, if we've got to keep this thing that had been ruined over a series of poor renovations throughout its life, what can we do? And opportunities like this are a lot of fun to deal with. Even offices like mine embrace the possibility of handling an old building, not genuinely a heritage building, I hasten to say, a simple weatherboard workers' cottage, and B, trying to deliver something for our client regardless of the circumstances. At the time that we had this project, I'd had the privilege of being a visiting professor at the School of Architecture in Venice, and during that time I was taken by Francesco Del Co to look at Palazzo del Te by Giulio Romano, the famous Mannerist palazzo in Mantova in Italy. And in that building, Romano breaks all of the rules of classicism. Some of you will know that building and know what he did. And with my tongue firmly planted in my cheek, I saw this project as an opportunity to start to mess with some of our rules of heritage conservation as they applied to a building that had already been destroyed. If a building's already been destroyed, what am I restoring or renovating? It's not there anymore. So then I'm just doing one of those TV show restorations. And I thought there was more of an opportunity here. So if you look closely at the image before you, you'll see that the paint colours are heritage colours. That there's something tricky going on with the candy stripe paint that is usually on the outside of the veranda. It's now found its way inside. It's setting up a rhythm that is arrhythmic in terms of the window moulds, which are doing weird things if you look closely, and definitely a tribute to Romano. The bench seat that we put there for our clients to sit and engage with the street should have a picket fence in front of it. We never really intended to put the picket fence back, and so on. So these projects are really nice to do. They're exercises in, I see them as me getting to reveal a little bit about who's influencing me at the time, who has influenced me more generally, and opportunities to pay tribute to those people. So the site's very small, it's constricted, and it's a 70 square metre project, so it's tiny. We were doing this project at the same time as completing the 13,000 square metre design hub. And it underlines the fact that the opportunity for architecture isn't related to scale, ever. Only a fool would pass by an opportunity like this. It doesn't matter what else you happen to be doing at the time. So you see there the existing building on the left, completely destroyed. The windows at the front were steg bar windows circa 1975. But an interesting plan, and this is a very interesting plan. I didn't talk about this enough at lunchtime, but I'll spend a little more time. That plan resonates of the workers' farm buildings of Ireland and France, and it has one particular peculiarity which you can see straight away. It has no corridor. It's a divided plan, which also harks to the Japanese house. It's a really lovely plan, but totally irreconcilable in terms of modern day living, getting a building envelope to work properly in terms of our energy requirements and so on. So what we did is kept the front bit, you can see, turned that into the main living area, and we proceeded to do an exercise in historicism, but not a heritage exercise, if you understand the subtlety there. And then a small courtyard, a light court, and then a new addition built to the boundaries effectively that includes a study come guest room, a bathroom and a bedroom with another little light court at the back. And I show this slide now because it's an insight into the way we work in my office. I have a tiny office. We still produce buildings this way. Older architects in the room might recognise that as that's called a working drawing. You can build a building from those drawings, and we just finished the design hub, and a young architect came up to me and said to me, "What? This building's amazing. What program did you use to?" and I said, "Oh, you probably haven't heard of it. It's called the FLED." And he looked at me and he said, "FLED," and he pulled out something and wrote it down. FLED, I'll check that out. That's just the way we work. It's a fact that I did these drawings for this building, having spent an afternoon with Glenn in his office in Mosman, and we went through what he was working on at the time. This is going back a few years now. And I came back to our office in Melbourne and I said to Hayley, I'm not working hard enough. There's an old guy in Sydney, I don't know whether you've heard of him, Glenn Murcutt. He's doing really good drawings. We're not documenting enough because Glenn does his buildings in a similar way. It's just an old-fashioned way of producing a building. It doesn't mean that we're computer illiterate, but it's the only way I know how to do these things. Anyway, there you can see a little bit more of the detail of this thing. I'm not going to dwell on this project. It's just a nice, interesting diversion from what you'll see for the rest of this talk. Within the context of those tributes to architecture and the history of architecture, you can see references, for example, to Alto's Villa Maria and the paired columns, without the rope around them. But two light cannons, a direct reference to Kazuo Shinohara's second phase. That's our little skateboard chair from the M Pavilion. The battens on the wall there are me putting back the lathe from the lathe and plaster that was never there in the first place. Again, as a tongue-in-cheek comment back to the heritage people at City of Melbourne. If you look really closely at things like the detail of the windows there, it's a very refined piece of engineering that we produced in the office. That bifold door is a bifold door sitting on steel flats. You can see there a little jockey wheel supporting the weight of the door. And a little nod to Glenn with those slotted vents that he has on his fireplaces. So this is a lot of fun to do, right? I'm just getting to play architecture for a project, and in the back bit to get light, to solve the problem of light into an enclosed row house. The roof is glazed, and I'm whizzing through this one. And the roof is operable. So that was a great reaction. For those of you down the back, the lady at the front said, "Yeah." I said at lunchtime, that's as close as you'll get to computer animation in my office. This then interestingly became a precedent for the M Pavilion project that we did a couple of years after this, but also at one of the houses that I'll show in a minute. So that couple can nuance the light depending on the time of the day and the time of the year. This is interesting in the context of the project that Matt showed a minute ago. This is a hiker's shelter in the Grampians in Western Victoria with similar problems and a similarly sensitive site with a clear Indigenous history. And the problem of building remotely, the problem of creating a system or a prototype that could be replicated on different campsites was what we were set by Parks Victoria a number of years ago now. And we solved the problem. You see that little central structure, similar to Matt's, series of boardwalk walks to get people off the vegetation. The circles are where you can pitch a tent. At the top there are a couple of dunnies. And we solved the problem using scaffolding tube and scaffolding couplings to make a construction system that could be walked into a remote site and easily added to or reduced in size. And interestingly, that Indigenous shelter is replicated at the Parks Victoria offices in Halls Gap, and so it became an obvious reference in the same way that in his own way Matt talked about his project in Tasmania. So it's a really simple system, really quick to build, easy to put together and pull apart again. Creating what feels like a little chapel on the site with remarkable bush in the background. And that was the system that we devised. Pretty basic, I've got to say. Nothing too complicated about it. But there's an elegance and a sense of quiet about that system, which I quite like. I won't recount the story of the history of that project as it's transpired, because it's not a happy one. I don't want to spoil dinner afterwards. Sarah, well, I'll tell you the story then. No, wrong project. That's what should be being built at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Maybe later. Okay, this is a house that we did for a solicitor and his family. We always enjoy working for lawyers. and this was no exception. In fact, our client was fantastically supportive for us, very good at decision making and understood that he was effectively a patron for this project. He was friends with the owners of the Peninsula House, which we'd done years and years before this, and really wanted another one of those buildings. And that is a problem. Architects are always moving on, and our new clients always want to go back to where we were because that's what they've seen and like. So we actually produced a number of schemes for this project. One was a tower, a really beautiful building. One was terraced into the steeply sloping sand dune. But we ended up with this, and we ended up with this as part of a very healthy and robust process, which I'm happy to talk about more in detail later, maybe. But by going to what we knew, what we do when we do that is we take what we've already done and revisit it. So this is literally the Glenburn house bent into a right angle with some other stuff going on. And it's a nice building. The really interesting thing about this building for the office, though, was the paradox between what the client aspired to and what they demanded. A weekend house by the coast. This is right on the Southern Ocean. But also that they insisted on everything about the building being as smart as possible. And in fact, this whole building can be run through your smartphone, including the operation of the facade. And the paradox exists in the conflict between escape from all of that stuff and then going to a house where all of that stuff actually still exists with bells on. And we did debate it, client and architect. The client always wins. So we ended up with a building that is just completely able to be run remotely, which in a weekend house is not a bad thing. The other thing about weekend houses as opposed to permanent residences is that it's a conscious decision to encounter the architecture. You have to actually think about going to the building as opposed to just going home at night. And that's interesting because that sets up a sequence of events. So there's the decision, the anticipation, the journey, the reward at arrival. And that sequence creates, in my mind, a linearity that appears in this and a couple of other buildings that fall under the same definition. So you can see, if I take that journey through the building, then you arrive here. There's a utility room that's like a bathing box house when you've been down surfing, come back and shower off an outdoor transition space, and then the kitchen table. And the kitchen table I've just defined or described in other projects as being like the altar of the Australian family. So in a family house in Australia, one of the things that I think sets our buildings apart is that there's no formal dining room, that the focus of the house is where the food is and where people congregate. And typically in the Australian condition, that's informal and it centres around the kitchen. So that's a deliberate and considered sequence to get you to a point where you're at the table where you dump what you've brought with you. You've probably gone via the supermarket, whatever, to get there. And then this building, that heavy core, bends against the slope that is the site and is countered by a continuous bench seat that runs like a window seat all the way around the building, so that you can sit in the facade and encounter the beauty of the site. So there's a little bit going on in there. That little thing there is a lookout. So as you arrive, your shoulders have dropped, you've finished suing someone or whatever it is. and your shoulders drop, and then you get a moment to pause and reflect as you look across to the little lookout there. For those of you who remember Prime Minister Holt, just there. So there it is. There's the little thing there. I'll talk a bit more with another project about that sequence of arrival at a building. This obviously is now all weathered. It's quite exquisite now. So this is designed to weather. It's an all grey building. These are the classic architect shots right at the, just when well, as Peter Corrigan used to say, get the shots and get the hell out of there. we always sometimes we go back and take more. That's that little transition space. It's a very steep site. There's a little bit more computer animation. What's... Yeah? Yeah. Paul. Obviously. You know, when you go to, when architects are presenting their buildings for awards and they stand there and they're always terribly nervous and they go, and there's the bathroom. And there's a panel of architects going, yeah, I reckon I can recognise a bathroom when I see one. Thanks for that. And there's the window seat. And there's that chair again. The bathroom is prototypical. We first did that bathroom in the St Andrews Beach House, which you're not going to see tonight, which also won the Robin Boyd Award, I don't know how many years ago, a long time ago. And we've developed that, and we do that as an office. We find a solution and then we keep it and we nuance it. So we refine it project to project. Because a good idea is a good idea. So you don't just chuck it out to be different with the next project, but you can make good things better and better. So that's one of the explanations as to why there's a visual consistency in the work of the office, that we take our own work and reinvestigate it regularly. Oh, yeah, that one, yeah. This house is a house for a family who live in the house, so it's not a weekend house. It's a farmhouse. They run a small hobby farm. He still dabbles in real estate. It's in the Barrable Hills, which is about an hour's drive out of Melbourne. You can see the Yu Yangs, those of you who know Victoria, know the Ewings. We're actually doing a house just in the back of the Ewings at the moment on an amazing site. These people were in our office at about the same time as the previous project. And they were very nervous clients, very concerned. They'd never commissioned architecture before. They had no idea of what architects can do and bring to their aspirations. They were terrified, but they came to the office, I don't know how anyone else gets work like that, but they rang the office and said, "We want you to do a house." And I said, "Sure." And when they first came in, she particularly was very, very nervous, and she said, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe he said yes." And I said, "Well, I never say no." "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "I didn't think he'd say yes and do our house for us." And I said, "Well, that's how I make my living and put the food on my table." Anyway, it was a bit like that for a long time into the project, and we did, like we always do, a number of schemes, none of which they were happy with. And we had those kind of moments, sort of seminal points in the journey where they said, "But we love the work of the office." And I kept on saying, "But we're doing the work of the office." Anyway, I think they think that's the work of the office now. This warrants a bit of... I like this building. We're really happy with the way it's turned out. It's a big parasol, which is an exercise in placemaking and defining a position on a greenfield site. I'll talk a little bit about the positioning of the site in terms of the picturesque in landscape. So I'm a fan of Capability Brown, Lancelot Capability Brown and the picturesque. And the position of this building is highly contrived and very deliberately creating a theatrical sequence of events. The Southern Ocean's down here and the wind blows that way typically. There's existing little farmhouse there, a sort of dilapidated thing, and some sheds. This is the approach road, and the approach to the existing building is that way, so as direct as you can get it. And the building's sort of right in the corner of that. And so we said, okay, we want you to be counterintuitive with the approach. We'll give you a glimpse of the building as you go along this dirt road, so you can see up a 30-metre hill to just get a glimpse of the roof. As you arrive at that point, you turn your back on the building altogether, get to that turn there and see the building again from a different viewpoint. Drive all the way down here. Now we're asking our clients to commit the money to do that, right? So you've got to do it. Why don't we just use the drive instead? When you enter the site, you go down into a valley here where the building disappears again. You go steeply up the hill and you can see across the top of that roofscape, that first photo, back to the Yu-Yangs. And then you dive down into the building, which is set in a landscape that's a series of moguls and contours to disrupt the wind flow over the site. That's highly sequenced and very theatrical and very deliberate. And it extends the experience of the architecture into the approach to the site. So it's a deliberate thing that we have done on a number of occasions as an office. The building itself is dramatically simple. It's just two pavilions. A living block with a couple of three bedrooms and a couple of bathrooms, a kitchen and living area. The separate block with a family room with a piano in it, a mud room and a home office and a carport. So that driveway's taken through there. And then there's this, as I said, the guys are into real estate, and he said to me one day, "What is this?" And I'm expecting a good reaction from you. And I said, "That's the architecture." Because it's not anything. Some people understand what I mean. So there you can now start to read that building. These photos taken really soon after it was finished. So here, the top of the roof is here. Okay, to give you an idea of slope, you can just see the shapes of the landscape there. And just for you, so this post dates the Little House addition, the M Pavilion. So it's an interest. That's what we do in the office. So we go, the roof's interesting. Why don't we look at how we can do something with that? But we won't just do it on one project and abandon it. We'll do it over a series of projects and see where we can take it. So in that sense, that is genuine research, and that's the way we run the office. So it's an atelier where we're investigating things. And in principle, the concept scheme for this had every single panel opening in different directions to do all sorts of things. And the reality of budget limited our ability to do that. But who knows, one day we set the whole thing up so it could become a reality one day. And the building itself is very calm and simple. It's a cement sheet building. It's not an expensive building. There's an acknowledgement of the crude subtlety of Australia and the way we particularly construct in our rural and outback sites. I've written about the constructed intervention in Australia attaining a significance beyond its physical reality simply because it can be the difference between life and death in this country. So that sort of detail there, although it's highly considered, is also deliberately dumbed down, not tricked up. Architects can do all sorts of stuff. Sometimes it's better if you don't do that stuff to make the point. And the point here is that this hayshed structure is a profound and quite romantic image on our hills in this country. And so we're actually really just making one of those. It's just a little bit more refined than just a hayshed. And the sense of the landscape rolling through the building is illustrated in images like that. Oops. Have I told you about the chair? There are two of them. So it's plywood, it's cheap. This isn't an expensive building. It feels grand on a certain level. I described Capability Brown and the picturesque. I could have been describing the approach to the Parthenon. So this is the temple on the hill. You hit the three-quarter view at the critical moment. They're deliberate. Those things are deliberate. So I am clicking this thing. It is happening. It's just happening slowly. There, the bathroom, stuff. There. So final project. And so last but not least is the little chapel that we did in Venice last year for the Biennale on the island of St Giorgio Maggiore. This is the Palladio Cathedral. This exquisite pair of courtyards also by the Palladio. Quite beautiful if you can get in there. The Cheney Foundation, a defunct amphitheatre, swimming pool that's not available, and our site. So St Mark's Square is here. It's the Vaporetto stop for those of you who've been here. The Cipriani Hotel's just under there. That's important for later on in the talk. And so Francesco Del Co invited 10 architects curated an exhibition by 10 architects who were invited by the Vatican, is more correct, to each do a chapel as part of last year's Biennale. And the chapels were all given the same brief. They were to be a maximum of 60 square metres. They had to be transportable. The agenda at the time was that they would leave the Biennale when the exhibition was over and go into the villages in central Italy that had been destroyed by earthquakes a couple of years ago and be used as temporary chapels until rebuild had taken place. That was how we were briefed as a group of architects. The island is the only parts of this island that are all normally accessible to the public are here, around here, in here, and here. That's all closed off. This still works as a monastery. Monastery. And one of the things that happened with this project was that this garden got opened up to the general public, and that meant to the citizens of Venice. And the exciting news about that is that the Vatican and the Cini Foundation and the City of Venice have decided to just keep the chapels there permanently, so that the garden remains open and it remains an exhibit run now by the Cini Foundation, which is good. And if only I had known that when we designed the building. So the architects were Norman Foster, Andrew Berman from New York, Flores and Prats from Spain, Sean Godsell, Eduardo Sudogimura. This is Studio Matt guys, Fujimura from Japan, Carlton and Cellini. And we were each taken to Venice to pick the site. How cool is that? I picked this site because it's right over from the Cipriani. And I picked it in the hope that George Clooney would see the building, commission the architect, sit at the pool and look over and go, who did that? Still waiting for the call. He has been busy. He got married, you know. So we each picked a site and off we went. And we were teamed with a local builder. The map people we'd worked with when we were shortlisted for the Australian Pavilion. So they were our architects of record. So we knew those guys. A delightful, fabulous firm. And we could use any material we wanted to, as long as it was the zinc provided to us by a particular company that was a Venice-based zinc cladding company. And anything else that we suggested that we might use, we were told bluntly, no, I don't use that zinc cladding. So it was like, oh, really? Do I have to? We designed a, there it is. That's Pseudo Demora there. Smiljan Radic, I forgot to mention, he's in here somewhere. Under there. Flores and Prats and Cellini, the Italian architect. We designed a building, because of the brief, we designed a building that was transportable. So we used the 40-foot shipping container as a dimensional module, tipped it on its end, and made it so that you could pack this thing up and ship it out. That was the idea. And the only two things that any of the architects were allowed to put into the chapel was an altar and a lectern. And we were trying to reference, we did a vertical thing that was the only vertical chapel there. And it was a direct reference to the bell towers of Venice, which are remarkable feats of engineering. And so we had bells in there. And we had a bell maker in Victoria, Anton Hassel, who made the Federation bells at Federation Square. He's a world-renowned bell maker. And we said to the Vatican, we want to stick bells in there. And and we want them designed by an Australian, and he can do all sorts of things. We'll do it. We'll get sponsorship. And we were told via Delco, absolutely not. No, and the idea was that people could come when they came to the chapel and ring the bell. No, you're not allowed to put any new bells in Venice at all because it's controlled. The bells are controlled, and we weren't allowed to do that. So we did a bell tower that isn't a bell tower and a transportable chapel that's now permanent. We built the altar so that it could house all of the stuff that you need to drive the flaps, and we built that elsewhere without the architect really knowing about it. So it was an interesting project. But we said when we presented it, this chapel could be in Coober Pedy, it could be in Sydney Harbour. It should be seen that way, and in the true spirit of the Jesuit missionary should be embraced for its ability to take the word of God to the world, which is fundamental to Catholicism. Anyway, someone said to me when they saw it, it looked like the obelisk from 2001, A Space Odyssey. And it probably did. That's Smillian's chapel in the background there. So we have this lovely abstract object that opens itself to expose an altar and a bell tower and a lectern. And it was a big deal. It was a lot of fun to do. The opening had 7,000 people on the island. The Vaporetto queue went round the island. It was quite extraordinary, and one of the senior cardinals from the Vatican came and opened it all. It was a really nice thing to be involved with, and I really hope that one day if Architecture Australia ever does a special edition on sacred spaces, they might include a chapel in Venice by an Australian architect. We lined the inside with gold aluminium. We were told we couldn't do that because the zinc company didn't make gold. So at that point I said, I'll come over there with a can of Porter's Gold paint and paint it. They said, okay, don't come over, we'll find out a solution. So we just used some aluminium, but it kind of works and it gives it a lovely ethereal glow to the whole thing. And there you get a sense of what we were trying to achieve. The water and the setting was beautiful enough. It didn't require enclosure, which some of the other architects chose to do. It actually required exposure. So by revealing the altar and positioning a priest at the altar, the backdrop of the church was nature. And Francesco referenced Asplund's Woodland Chapel as a precedent project for these chapels, so it kind of all made sense. George Clooney. Okay, the final image, how serendipitous. If I was being dishonest, I'd say I intended that light pattern to happen because it makes a perfect cross when you look up into the... But that was what's known technically in architecture as sheer fluke. Thank you.